Hello and welcome to part 3 of my audio mastering tips and tricks kind of help vlog type thing that I'm doing. The idea here is to do a relaxed, just as if I was talking to you, explainer without any crazy visuals or technical language that's going to spook anybody who's, approaching getting their music mastered. The thing I want to discuss today is probably the most misunderstood and possibly maligned thing within the mastering world. There's a big misunderstanding about what the term means in respect to one specific area. I think the reason why this has happened is twofold. What I'm going to explain is the difference between stereo processing of your mix and mastering. Sometimes we call it 2-bus processing or output bus processing, and then there's mastering. Obviously there is a grey area between the two because of the processing that's applied, specifically the processing, but the process within the stages of getting your music from A to B are not the same thing. So let me explain why I think this has happened, and these are the two reasons that I mentioned earlier. First, when the internet first became a big thing, people were selling their wares and they were advertising mastering houses, mastering engineers, what then became online mastering. And one of the biggest ways to do this was to show off about what your audio is going to be put through or might be put through. This obviously is still a big thing on Instagram and forums and stuff. Now, unfortunately, what that gave the impression of is that mastering is running audio through stuff, when really that's just part of it, and sometimes it's not really involved at all. The other way that this has become a big thing is through the automated mastering websites and the plugins which do some level of AI. Now, I'm not having a go at these websites. I'm not intimidated by them. I don't think we're doing the same thing. I use some of them. For example, I've done beta testing for Ozone. But although they're called mastering, and when you click on them it says mastering, the automated side of things is not what mastering is. It's basically a sort of clever AI way of processing your audio to try and get it from A to B, tone-wise, loudness-wise, which again is a big part of mastering, but is not the whole picture. Now, if you just take a bunch of songs and run them all through one of these automated processes, they'll change and they'll probably get better as far as what you envision they needed to be next. But mastering isn't about that. Mastering is about the release, and it's about preparing something to go out into the world. Here's an analogy which I like to use. Mastering is not cooking. It's not preparing ingredients. It's the plating. It's the plating, and it's what you see in front of you and have the music. So it's not adding salt, it's not heating it up, it's not any of this. It's putting it in front of people on a plate in a room with lighting, with cutlery. You can go as mad as you want with the analogy, but can you see what I'm saying is the difference between the sort of production process and the mastering process? Mastering is just a way of presenting it. It's not a way of processing. But often, to present it the way that the artist wants, you need to do some processing, but also sometimes not. So I've done projects where I've had tracks with no processing on. I do it quite a lot, actually. I've had projects where I do tracks where I've just done limiting for loudness. Or I've had tracks where it's already crushed dynamically and I've just fixed up the EQ a little bit, pulled the levels down, that sometimes happens, and export it. Now, these automated services aren't able to do this because they're not able to make the human decisions. Now, one of the things with stuff like Ozone, for example, is clever, is that they basically give you settings and then you can do what you want. It's not like a fixed thing. So that's very clever. That's a good way to sort of fill the gap in knowledge a little bit. The other thing which sometimes gets confused with mastering is mix bus processing within the production stage. Now, the confusion I think here comes from the fact that the tools are often the same. If you're producing a track for an artist and you're doing mixing, it's entirely correct, normal, up to you if you want to do something to the 2 bus or the output bus, the stereo master. But that's a production choice. It's a production choice which is possibly moving the mastering in one direction because you're making it louder or brighter or whatever. But that's not mastering, that's just the overall process. And you'll find that the stuff that's used to do that is the same, literally the same plugin sometimes. But it's a different mindset and it's a different stage. So it's entirely common, in fact I'd say more often than not now, that I will receive audio with a bit of compression, a bit of limiting, a bit of EQ, maybe like tape emulation, that sort of stuff, saturation, on the master bus, and it's completely fine. There was a time where I'd be like, no, take it all off. But what I've learned is that artists know what they want generally when they're doing stuff, and if they've made that decision to apply something, providing that it's not just for loudness, if you're outputting something just for a reference level, to then go and listen to in your car or speakers or whatever, take that off, but anything which has got the music closer to your vision, leave that on. And that can be limiting, and it can be clipping. If you genuinely think that running it through Ozone Maximizer or L2 limiter or whatever is part of your production sound, that's completely legitimate, and it's exactly the same to me as a modern version of, say, for example, people recording down to certain tape machines or recording their masters back through certain master buses on consoles, back when that was the main way of working. Now, just did a quick edit there because my cat flap is actually right next to me here, and she did a massive run through the room. Anyway, I cut that out because that would be confusing. So I was basically talking about the difference between mix bus processing and mastering and how they use the same tools for different ends, but the areas can become grey. One of the great things about working in the box is that you can send versions. I personally like the mixing engineer to commit to a version because I think it puts a good level of pressure to not be 90% there with 2 versions, if you see what I mean, and then trying to get the 10% out of the both and struggling, especially when it comes to loudness. But there's nothing wrong with exporting a couple of versions and being, we did overcook it a bit, but we like the sound of it. But here's one that's not quite as cooked, because it might be that you hear some stuff that we're not hearing, especially when it comes to limiting. Anything that involves transient distortion, a mastering engineer will be able to focus on that in a way that you might not if you've been listening for hours and hours, you've been tracking guitars and doing vocals and stuff. It's just, that's not to say that mastering engineers are another level of listener or another level of audio engineer. It's just that we're focusing on this one thing. So I hope that demystifies some of this. If you're putting some stuff on your master bus, you can then export that, make that loud, put that on your website, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, fantastic. You're kind of missing the step of mastering there. And I understand that most of the time that's more to do with cost than anything else. But you'll find that it's almost always beneficial to have somebody, especially if you've worked on it all yourself, oversee the final step, because it means that you're not on your own. It means you've got the sounding board to go back across, and it means that adjustments can be made that automated processes or sort of fixed chains that you've made aren't able to do. So you might really like the sound of a chain, and you might even say that to the mastering engineer. I do like putting a clip before the limiter. I liked what it was doing to the snare, but I wasn't confident on my EQ stuff. Would you be able to replicate that? And like I said in my previous video, any mastering engineer who's worth their salt will be able to interpret that and will be able to work with you. Anybody who kicks back against it, I'd say, me personally, I would see that as a sign of a lack of confidence in receiving different types of audio. And I think being able to receive different types of audio and do what you need to do to it really is what makes a professional mastering engineer and professional. So yeah, I hope that helps. As I always say, any questions in the comments, you can also get in touch with me, contact at joecaithnessmastering.com, and joecaithnessmastering.com is my website. And yeah, just let me know any topics you want covered, any sort of questions, any bad experiences you've had where you really want to know how to avoid that in the future. Let me know. I'll make a short vlog style video on it, and I hope that that can help you in your process in the future. Anyway, cheers, and sorry about the cat edit. See ya.